Today, I'm going to share how I transitioned from being a full-time classroom teacher to being a full-time tutor. And I'll also give you some suggestions on things you might want to try if you're in that position, in case you're in a different situation than I was at the time. So I'll talk about how I prepared financially, but also I'll share a few things that I would have done differently from day one, perhaps, or things I did that worked really well, because being a tutor is very different from being a teacher. I left in 2017. It was the January of 2017. And when I made the decision to hand in my resignation, the first thing I did was I made sure that I financially saved as much as I could to act like a buffer. Because when I left, I was, like many people, I was burnt out, I was fed up, and unfortunately, it was affecting my physical health. The workload and just not being able to switch off was affecting me physically. It was also affecting my mental health, but unfortunately, I wasn't aware enough or tuned in enough to use that as my trigger to leave. So for me, it was when it started affecting my physical health that I knew I had to walk away. And so I wanted to leave in a way that gave me a bit of time to decompress. And I didn't want to walk from the fire to the frying pan by putting myself under loads of pressure to earn a load of money. And so that's why I saved up as much money as I could so that I had a buffer for when I left. Now, I was in a position where my husband was earning enough to cover our bills, so I wasn't under this immediate pressure to earn loads of money as such. But I still took it very seriously and I still grew my business. And I'm really pleased that I did, because actually a few years later, when we had the lockdown with COVID, I lost half of my business in a couple of hours when it was announced that the national exams were cancelled. And at the same time, my husband got made redundant. So for about a year and a half, we were completely reliant on my tuition business. This business didn't exist at the time. And so one of the things that I did was I built a waiting list and so on, but just reversing back, even though I wasn't under pressure to earn money, I still took it seriously and I still tried to make it something that was viable, and I'm pleased that I did. But if I was in a situation where I had to earn a certain amount of money because my husband wasn't earning enough perhaps, or maybe if I was on my own, then I think the first thing I would have done is really worked out how much I need to earn in order to live. And often that's very different to matching your salary. You can often live and survive on less than what you actually earn in your job. So I think I would have worked that out, and I'm pretty sure that would have highlighted a few areas where I could have saved a bit of money to ease that pressure a little bit. And I probably still would have tutored, because that's something that felt very natural. But if I felt like that was too risky, then maybe I would have tried to secure other positions. It could be working in a supermarket, whatever it might have been. And I'm talking about that because I was in a situation where I needed to leave. It wasn't that I thought, you know what, I'm fine doing what I'm doing, but I fancy a change. I was in a situation where it was affecting my health, and it was a deal breaker, and I needed to walk away. And so because there was that urgency, I probably would have planned what else I could do. In actual fact, when I did leave, I also was doing some freelance business training, because before I was a teacher, I was a business trainer as well. So I knew that those two things would give me a little bit of security. It was something I didn't need to think too much about. I knew how to do it. So from a financial perspective, I probably would have done a bit of planning beforehand if I was in the situation where I really, really needed to. But nonetheless, the financial buffer gave me that security. Another thing that I perhaps would have done is I perhaps would have launched my tuition business while I was teaching. And when I say launch, I mean, I'm just saying that I may have announced it on Facebook, or I might have created a Facebook page. That's what I'm saying about launching. And I probably would have tried to just secure some students for when I was leaving. So while I was still teaching, I wouldn't start tutoring because I didn't have the headspace. But at least that would have given me the security to know that I am walking into a business where I've got customers who are ready to go. So financially, there were a few things I did to prepare, and depending on your circumstance, there might be other things you need to do. Now, when I actually left, I started getting students really fast. I will share what I did, but quite honestly, the market has changed so much since then that if I were doing it now, I would probably approach it differently. What I did was I signed up to a website that allows you to it allows parents essentially to find you. And if they're interested, if you want to exchange details, then the parents pay a introduction fee to that company. So there was no fee that I had to pay. And at the time it worked really well because I was tutoring face to face. I was willing to travel out to people. And so this website works really well with locality. But I did find that when I moved online, the website just didn't work for me anymore. And I know a lot of people have experienced the same. So if I was starting now, I would definitely go for online. I wouldn't go for face-to-face, and therefore the way I would do things would be very different. If I were trying to get students now, I would do one of two things, or maybe even both. I would set up something like a Facebook page, just somewhere where I can very easily market myself, boost my visibility, and showcase what I do and how I do it. A website is good and everything, but I would have done that later, because creating a website, creating a logo, we often get very bogged down with that when we're launching some kind of business. But a website and logo on their own, they're not going to get you those immediate clients. You have to do a lot of work around that to do it. Whereas something like a Facebook page, which has got the visibility, if someone searches, you will show up because you're piggybacking off Facebook's visibility. So I probably would have done that. It allows me to publicly showcase what I do in just a really quick and easy way. So I would have done that. And I probably would have signed up to some agencies as well, because signing up to agencies is a really quick way to get clients, to start building some momentum. And of course, with business, it's a snowball effect. It's much easier to get clients when you already have clients. And so being able to talk about your experience, being able to show social proof, being able to show testimonials, all of those things really build up that trust. So that's how I probably would have gone about getting those initial clients through the door at the very beginning. I would have done the quick way. Another thing I would have done is I would have gone straight for online tuition. When I first started, I was teaching face-to-face. And at first I was going out to people, but then I was able to get more students by asking people to come to me, because I was cutting out that travel time, which meant I could take on another student. Then when I moved online, I was able to take on even more students, and I actually found it more efficient because online I was no longer restricted by where I was located. The world was my marketplace. I had students in other countries, all around the country, and so on. So that was a huge advantage. But also it meant that I could lessen that gap. So I actually teach back to back often. So as I'm finishing off a lesson, my next student is in the waiting room. And just by reducing that, it allowed me to actually take on more students, but reduced how many days I was tutoring. As the years have gone on, I have gone from 5 days to 4 to 3, and my next aim is to move to 2. Another thing that I would have done that I didn't do was I had a very teacher mentality. So immediately I was preparing lesson plans. I was thinking, right, how do I do an initial assessment? How do I track progress? How do I track results? Am I going to give parents reports? I was thinking so much like a teacher. If you're like me and you teach or are planning to teach students who already go to school, that means that we are not their primary source of education. We are someone they're going to as an addition. And so I don't do any planning. And when I say I don't do any planning, that's not an exaggeration. I don't do any planning. All the work that I do for my students is contained in that hour that I'm with them. So what I do is I have a bank of resources. I have thousands of resources that I can dip into. Sometimes I'll freestyle, I won't use a resource. And all my lessons, they start with a conversation, particularly with my older children. So I will say, how was school? How are you doing? How was your weekend? And, I was thinking we could maybe do this today. What do you think? And they might say, well, actually, I've got a test next week. Could we do that instead? Or I'm really struggling with whatever. So I can't plan because I am tailoring those lessons to exactly what they need at that particular time. And I didn't think like that because I was so used to being in this structured format where you know what you're going to teach and which week. And also, I don't give parents reports. I liaise with them. I might give them a few progress reports towards the end of term, for example, but I don't formalize the process because that's not my relationship with them. Yes, I'm an educator, but they're going to be interested in more than this is a target grade. This is how I think they're doing in terms of grades. They're interested in things outside of that. Has their children's confidence, has that grown? What are they seeing in terms of their children's engagement in the lessons? So those points, those touch points that we're very used to as teachers are a bit different when you're a tutor. I mentioned about the paperwork. I know a lot of people are a bit anxious about, is there lots of paperwork and admin? There are two ways I go around this. The first thing is I do set homework with my lessons, but I very occasionally mark it outside of lesson time because actually what's useful is talking about it with my students. So normally what happens is I will look at their work while they're doing a particular task the following week, and then I'll talk them through some of the improvements they could make and maybe line that up with their next piece of homework. So all the work I do is contained. Another thing that I do to reduce admin is I streamline all my processes and I use a lot of automation. Now, when you've just started a business, you don't have the budget to invest in loads of automation, but there is a lot that you can use for free or for very low cost. And below, I've got a link to an episode where I deep dive into this and I list a whole load of platforms that you can use to suit any budget. Now, I wish I had done that a lot sooner. I wish I'd had the foresight to do that a lot sooner, because what we have the tendency of doing is thinking, well, I only have a couple of students, what I'm doing works absolutely fine for now. But our intention is to grow. And when you then grow and you're really busy and you realize, oh my God, I'm just drowning in this admin, I need to change how I'm doing it. That is the worst time to try and figure out what software to use, how to set it up, how to transition your clients to using this new software. So if you can do that, if you can put automation in the very early stages, then it does save a lot of hassle later on. Essentially what you're doing is you're future-proofing your business. You're preparing for your future success. So I hope I've given you a few ideas through my story, through my journey, and I would really love to hear where you're at in your journey, whether you have any anxieties or any questions, or even if you have any advice that you'd like to add. There are, of course, so many more things that goes into setting up your tutoring business, but just with these small things, if you're in a position where you need to leave the profession or your job and you want to set up tutoring, then you want to do things as quickly as possible rather than having all these ideal things that you want to do. You can do the fast things to get launched, start getting those customers in, and then later on you can start building around that, things like your website, for example. So comment below with a bit of information about your story or what you'd add to my list, and I'm looking forward to carrying on this conversation in the comments.